Have you ever been in a room so full of noise, voices, laughter, judgment, only to have it all vanish the second someone dared to be seen? This is not just a story about music. It's about two twin girls, invisible to most, targets of cruelty, and labeled as nobodies. Until one moment, one choice, one voice, turned everything upside down. They were never supposed to shine. They were chosen to fail. But when their voices broke the silence, they did more than surprise a crowd. They revealed the power of love, courage, and a father's unshakable belief. This is the true story of resilience that starts with pain, climbs through sacrifice, and ends in a performance that no one, absolutely no one, could forget. Before we dive in, take a moment, like this video if you believe in second chances. Share your thoughts below. Have you ever been underestimated? Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a story that could change your day or your life. Let's begin. It was the end of an ordinary school week. The auditorium was packed not because of a major event, but because of something else: anticipation. Some would say tension. Most students had shown up for laughs, not inspiration, because two girls were about to perform. Two girls no one believed in. Isabel and Ivy were used to being invisible. Not in the literal sense. They were always present, sitting in the third row, sharing a desk, speaking only when spoken to. But to the rest of the school, they didn't matter. They were the weird twins, dressed in hand-me-downs, always quiet, always walking alone. They were an easy target. No one expected them to sing well. In fact, most assumed the invitation was a cruel joke, some inside prank to humiliate them in front of the entire school. And yet, here they were, standing still, holding hands, taking a deep breath, and then nothing. No laughter, no whispering, no mocking, just stillness. What followed was silence, not just the crowd, but even the most jaded hearts in the room. Long before the stage, before the spotlight, before even a glimmer of recognition, Isabel and Ivy lived in the shadows. They weren't always quiet. In fact, when they were younger, they would sing in the back of their father's old pickup truck, giggling in harmony as he drove them through winding back roads of their rural town. But at school, it was different. There, difference had a price. Their clothes were worn but clean. Their backpacks faded. Their lunches were modest, sometimes just a peanut butter sandwich, split between the two. Kids noticed. And kids, as the world often forgets, can be merciless. They're so freaky. Someone once whispered behind them, "Are they mute or just weird?" Another student mocked. Every day was a test of silence, how long they could endure the giggles, the sidelong glances, the notes taped to their lockers. But it wasn't just the other children. Even teachers, with their good intentions and busy lives, passed over them. No birthday songs, no class project partners, no praise, just invisibility. Their father, James, noticed the subtle shifts, the shrinking shoulders, the growing silence at dinner. He'd ask gently, "How was school, girls?" And they'd answer with a shrug and a small, practiced smile. What they didn't tell him was how much it hurt, how every day they felt smaller, how they'd begun to believe the whispers. And so, the world kept spinning, while Isabel and Ivy slowly began to disappear, not from the world, but from their own sense of worth. Until one day, something changed. James had calloused hands and soft eyes. He wasn't a man of many words, but when he looked at his daughters, his silence spoke volumes. A single dad for nearly 6 years, he juggled shifts at the local hardware store, with side gigs fixing fences and plumbing leaks, anything to make sure. His girls had a roof over their heads and books in their backpacks. His own dreams had been paused the day his wife passed unexpectedly. But he made a quiet vow that night, staring at his sleeping daughters, "I won't let their light go out." And so, every morning, He packed their lunches, adding a sticky note with a heart and a smiley face. He braided their hair on picture day. He read them poems at night, even when his hands ached and his eyes burned from exhaustion. But he knew something was off. They weren't singing in the truck anymore. They weren't laughing like they used to. He started taking them out for walks in the evenings, just to get them talking again. Sometimes they'd walk in silence, side by side, until one of the girls, usually Ivy, would whisper, "We don't matter at school." "Dad," he'd kneel, eye level, and say, "You matter here. You matter everywhere. You just haven't found your stage yet." James didn't have money for tutors or private schools, but he had belief. And belief, when consistent and unshakable, becomes a kind of quiet revolution. So when the school announced a talent day and Isabel nervously brought home a sign-up form, James didn't hesitate. "Sing," he said. "Let them hear what I hear every day." He didn't know what would come next, but he had faith. It started with a name on a clipboard. Talent Day was a tradition at Mill Creek Middle School, a way to encourage confidence. According to the principal, though most students saw it as a popularity contest in disguise. Guitar solos, magic tricks, a few off-key pop songs, it was more spectacle than sincerity. Isabel didn't plan to sign up, not until a boy from her class leaned over, smirked, and said, "Hey, why don't the twins sing? That'd be hilarious." The word hilarious clung to her ears all the way home. Ivy noticed her sister clutching the sign-up form. "You're not really thinking about it, are you?" "I am," Isabel whispered. "But not for them. For us." Their names went on the list the next morning, inked in trembling letters, Isabel and Ivy Ford. The laughter in the hallway was almost immediate. Some students whispered that the school was in for a show. Others exchanged memes and jokes. "Get your earplugs ready." One text message read, even one of the teachers raised an eyebrow when reading the form. "Oh, the Ford twins? They're performing?" But none of it stopped them, because at home, their dad had turned the living room into a stage. He pushed the worn-out couch to the side, strung Christmas lights around the curtain rod, and handed them an old karaoke microphone he'd found at a yard sale. He didn't have a piano or sound system, but he had his arms wide open when their voices cracked from nerves. He had cheers when they got through a verse without stopping. He had tears in his eyes when, for the first time in months, they sang like they used to in harmony, not just with each other, but with hope. No one knew what was coming, especially not the ones who signed them up expecting a joke. The night before Talent Day was thick with silence. Not the kind of silence that fills empty rooms, but the kind that holds your breath hostage. In the Ford house, the lights were dimmed early, but no one slept. Ivy sat on the edge of her bed, wringing her hands, her song lyrics now worn and smudged from being read so many times. Isabel paced the floor in socks, mouthing verses under her breath, too nervous to sing aloud. Down the hall, James was heating up chamomile tea. He wasn't going to let them go to bed with their stomachs full of fear. He knocked gently, peeked in, and said, "I made something. Come with me." They followed him to the living room, now softly glowing from the string lights still hanging across the curtain rod. He handed them tea, sat cross-legged on the rug, and said, "Tomorrow there will be people who expect you to fail. They don't know you, but I do. I've seen you light up this room with your voices. I've watched you heal each other with harmony." Then he reached into his wallet, worn, cracked, and barely holding itself together, and pulled out 2 paper slips. "Bus tickets. One day, when you're ready," he said, "you'll take these and go wherever your voices carry you. But first, just sing, not for them, for yourselves." They didn't speak. They just curled up on either side of him, resting their heads on his shoulders, and let the tea warm their hands. That night, sleep finally came, and so did something else resolve. The auditorium lights buzzed overhead. Students filled the seats, shuffling, laughing, whispering, just as they always did. Teachers stood along the walls, arms crossed, half watching. On stage, a boy juggled tennis balls to polite claps. A girl played the keyboard and missed a few notes. Nothing unusual. Then it was their turn. Isabel and Ivy stepped out onto the stage. No glitter, no costumes. Just two girls in simple dresses, standing side by side. The room didn't fall silent immediately. A few students snickered. One boy muttered, "This is going to be good," dripping with sarcasm. And then they began. One voice, soft, clear, almost trembling. Then the second voice joined. The harmony unexpected, rich, haunting. It floated across the room like something sacred. The sound wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. It was pure, like breath turning into light. A song not of performance, but of truth. About being unseen. About longing to belong. About holding pain so long it turns into strength. And just like that silence, no one laughed. No one moved. Phones slowly lowered. Conversations stopped mid-whisper. A teacher removed his glasses, quietly wiping his eyes. The principal leaned forward in his seat. Even the boy who had laughed blinked hard, his face unreadable. When the final note faded, it didn't echo, it lingered. The room stayed quiet, as if no one wanted to break the spell. And in that pause, Isabel reached for her sister's hand. They didn't bow. They didn't smile. They just stood there. Seen. For the first time, the silence broke not with a roar, but with a single clap. From the back of the auditorium, a teacher stood up and applauded once. Then again. Then came the next and the next, until the entire room erupted not in forced politeness, but in something closer to awe. There were no screams, no chants, just a long, rising ovation filled with something few students had ever seen before respect. When Isabel and Ivy walked off stage, they passed classmates who avoided eye contact just days before. Now those same kids reached out with hesitant smiles, some murmuring, "That was amazing." One girl, who once snickered at their outfits, simply said, "You were brave." In the teacher's lounge that afternoon, they were the only topic. "I had no idea they could sing like that. Those lyrics, did you hear the pain in them?" Even the music teacher, who had once passed over them for a school choir audition, approached James in the parking lot. "Sir," she said, "your daughters have a gift. And more than that, they have something no lesson can teach. They have soul." News of the performance spread faster than anyone expected. A local journalist called the school asking for an interview. A youth music program reached out, offering to sponsor lessons. But it wasn't the offers that changed everything. It was the way Isabel and Ivy walked through the hallway on Monday. Heads high, not with arrogance, but with presence. They weren't invisible anymore, because they had sung their truth, and truth, when it's that raw, that real, doesn't need to shout to be heard. For most, the moment ended when the auditorium lights turned off. But for Isabel and Ivy, it was only the beginning. That weekend, their story appeared in the local newspaper under the headline "Twin Sisters Silence Bullying with Stunning Performance." A black and white photo showed them mid-song, eyes closed, hands clasped, a portrait of bravery without pretense. The story spread. One teacher posted a video clip online. Within hours, comments began flooding in. "I cried watching this. It reminded me of my daughter. These girls have the voices of angels and the strength of warriors." Proof that talent doesn't need a spotlight to shine. An arts foundation in the state capital invited them for a private audition. A local nonprofit offered to sponsor music therapy and voice coaching. A radio station played a recording of their song during morning traffic, and the host, with a voice cracked by emotion, said, "In all my years, I've never felt something so pure come through these speakers. But it wasn't the media attention that changed their world. It was what happened at home. At dinner, laughter returned. During rides in their father's truck, songs flowed freely again, sometimes silly, sometimes serious, but always together. And James, he stood a little taller, not because the world had finally seen his daughters, but because they had. They saw themselves, not as outcasts, not as victims, but as normal people, as young women who had every right to take up space, to speak, to be heard just like anyone else. James never wanted recognition. He wasn't chasing applause, headlines, or thank you cards. His rewards came in quiet forms: a giggle from the back seat, a scribbled drawing taped to the fridge, the gentle weight of 2 sleepy heads on his chest after a long day. But parenting, especially alone, costs more than most realize. There were nights when he skipped dinner so the girls could have seconds. Mornings when he walked to work in the cold so their bus passes could be renewed. Clothes patched instead of replaced. Shoes resoled twice. Extra jobs that left his back sore and eyes burning. And emotional costs, he carried those too. He absorbed their tears when they couldn't explain the cruelty of classmates. He bore the guilt of not being able to shield them from a world that sometimes felt sharper than it should be. He whispered encouragements into bedrooms that echoed with silence. And still, he never let go of the vision. Not of stardom, not of fame, just of wholeness, a life where his daughters didn't feel small, where they believed in their own worth, where they could speak up, stand tall, and be seen. When they sang that day on stage, and when the world finally listened, he didn't feel victorious. He felt relieved, because his daughters weren't just surviving anymore. They were becoming, and though it had cost him years of sacrifice, exhaustion, and moments of hidden fear, he would do it all again, every single day, because that is what love looks like when it never gives up. Long after the applause faded and the headlines quieted, what remained was something far greater than a single performance. It was the lesson etched in the silence that followed their final note. Isabel and Ivy didn't just prove they could sing. They reminded everyone watching that some of the strongest voices in this world don't come from stages or spotlights, but from those who've spent most of their lives being ignored. Their story isn't just about talent. It's about how the smallest act of courage can break years of silence. About how one person, one parent, one believer can change everything by refusing to let someone else's pain go unnoticed. For every child who's ever been laughed at. For every parent who's had to do more with less. For every teacher who's looked twice and decided to believe. This story is for you. Because love, when it is steady and selfless, doesn't need perfect circumstances. It only needs persistence. So, what can we take from this? 3 lessons from Isabel, Ivy, and their dad. Belief is a seed that grows in silence. You don't always see the result right away, but it matters more than you think. You don't need to be famous to be powerful. Sometimes the most ordinary people leave the deepest impact. Love that stays quietly, daily, without applause, is what makes transformation possible. When we choose to see others not for their clothes or silence or strangeness, but for their unseen beauty, we become part of the change. Let's keep choosing to see. This wasn't just a story about twin girls singing. It was about courage rising from the quietest corners. About a father who gave everything so his daughters could finally hear themselves loud and clear. It was about what happens when love refuses to give up. In a world quick to judge and slow to listen, we need more moments like this. Moments that challenge our assumptions. That remind us everyone has a voice, even if the world hasn't heard it yet. So if you've ever felt invisible, remember you are not alone. And if you know someone carrying silent pain, be the one who believes in them louder than the voices that try to tear them down. Practical takeaways. Look deeper. The quiet ones often carry the strongest stories and courage with consistency. Your belief in someone can outlast their doubt. Stand up when no one else does. One small action of kindness can change the entire trajectory of a life. Celebrate small wins. They often lead to the biggest breakthroughs. Be someone's James. You don't need money or status, just steady love. Thank you for being here. Like this video if it moved you. Share your story or message in the comments. Someone might need to hear it. Subscribe for more stories that celebrate the human spirit. Let's keep making space for voices that matter. Even the quiet ones. Especially the quiet ones.